So I work with a lot of people who are building products who are trying to come up with an idea to build. And I feel like there's assumptions that are baked into a lot of ideas and product development, and for good reason. I mean, we're coming up with a new idea. We have assumptions regarding these ideas, but they can ultimately cause these products to fail right out of the gates. An assumption about market demand. Does the product or idea that you have, does it even have a demand? Is there any marketplace for it? Pros and cons to doing the research, but curious what you think as you hear that, Rob. What about this assumption?
Yeah, I mean, I've got some thoughts on that for sure. When we were kind of putting together the notes for this video, the first thing that came to mind was 3D television. Do you have one? Did you ever buy one?
No, couldn't afford one even if I wanted one, but no.
Yeah, they weren't cheap, and you had to have the Blu-ray player, the special glasses. Like it was an investment, and to the best of my knowledge, these aren't real popular even today. They came out a while ago. I'm not exactly sure, probably 5-10 years. They didn't take off. And so traditional thinking would say, well, if you're going to develop a product like that, you should be doing your market research. You should be surveying your customers. You should be asking lots of questions because building a television is super expensive. And if you get it wrong, well, I mean, depending on how many you make, that can be a problem. And so I'm guessing they did at least enough research to believe that there are some niche of users that want a 3D television. And perhaps some of them were willing to spend $25,000, $50,000 on one of these first generation televisions. I know when I first saw some of the LCDs and plasmas that had originally come out, the flat screen revolution, $10, $20, $30,000. This was like a flagship display at Circuit City. So these 3D televisions, they probably did their market research, but thinking back on it, maybe it was timing. Maybe they just released it too soon. Or maybe there would have been a market for it in the 1950s when 3D television was all the rage, but we didn't have the technology at that point. So sometimes conducting that market research can lead you astray, and it can lead you to building a product that it turns out, even though a lot of people say, yeah, this is pretty cool, they're not really going to pony up the cash for it. But perhaps smaller batches, perhaps more experiments, perhaps lesser expensive versions of it to try to gain market adoption. But those are just some thoughts I had, just kind of going with this idea of like market research. How would you know that a product is actually going to fit in the marketplace? Any thoughts on your end?
Yeah, I suppose it's taking this idea of research. In fact, we had a conversation about research yesterday about some tasks within our company, and the question usually goes to, well, how much time do you spend in research? Is too much research a possibility to where you've got research, you're paralyzed by research, where you don't actually get something out of the gates soon enough? Assumption by way of market demand is a real thing. But how does one balance research for market demand and actually, getting something out there? I mean, they miss the timing, maybe because they've done too much research, or I've not done enough research, and we've kind of botched up our release.
Yeah, knowing what and when to release is a delicate dance, and just picking on a recent product launch, the Apple, they call it spatial computing because they don't want to be associated with virtual reality. But I mean, in a way, that kind of brings me to another sort of product where we assume there's a market for virtual reality, and there is some small market. If you go back a long time ago, Nintendo had this VR kind of set of glasses where you saw this orange kind of drawing of the animation or whatever it was. If I recall, people got headaches, and it was a weird experience, but it was still new and novel. And Nintendo had this thing long time ago. Wouldn't call it virtual reality, but some sort of pencil-drawn reality. Maybe too soon. It didn't quite sell. And Greg, by the look on your face, did you even know that this thing existed?
Yeah, I've had some familiarity with that. I even had like a horizontal, vertical refresh set of glasses for that came with my NVIDIA game video card. That I used to build computers. I'm like, well, I'm going to buy this one because it comes with a set of glasses and a game that does this 3D effect on screen. And I got wickedly sick playing that game because the refresh rates were way too slow, and you had terrible headaches. It was cool, but not sustainable. I mean, it's just a party trick.
Speaking of party tricks, a friend of mine at a party had one of these hooked up to a computer, and I put it on for the first time, and it really felt like I was in this other world, to a point where they had to stop me from falling into the table that was holding the display up, because I was just kind of, in reality, losing my awareness
Yeah.
of where I really was standing. But I mean, back to this idea of right time, right place. There's been a lot of attempts at this augmented reality, virtual reality becoming mainstream, assuming user behavior, assuming people want this change in behavior. Do you have any
Mhm.
examples on that? I mean, I can think of at least one.
Well, yeah, there's a few examples I can think of, and having users interact sooner with your concepts, I think, is really important. And when that doesn't occur, then you see people flailing. Redesigning a new tool. I can't imagine if somebody were to say, I've got a brand new hammer idea. In fact, I've seen a couple before. It's like, check out this hammer. You hardly have to do anything. And you hold it like this instead of like this. And it just feels really weird, approaching a common, everybody has done it this way forever, and now you're telling me to grip it differently because it's better. Very difficult to justify some of that. There were still some slow adopters to you grabbing the whole pneumatic nailer situation, but now you would be completely not competitive enough if you didn't have a pneumatic nailer. I mean, it's a common tool you have to have in your toolbox. User behavior, I think, is often maybe is tied to people's desire to try something new, and the person building the thing is also excited about trying something new. So the problem I find that usually happens with the user behavior situation is I'll find other people like me to say, what do you think of this cool new thing? Like, oh my gosh, that is so great. I can't believe you made that. Well, that's great. That's a feedback loop. All I've done is talk to myself just in another body. Where do we imagine, if we've done the research to say there's a market demand for it, who are those people going to be? And then let them give their thought on it. Do you really appreciate their reaction, or are we going to defend your idea? And I think user behavior in combination with my ideas sometimes need to give way. If their behavior says one thing, we need to respect that that's likely going to impact our viability of our product, and then adjust some things, or maybe do some testing. Give them option A, but then give them option B as well. See which one gets more traction. How about you, Rob? Have you seen some user behavior mistakes?
Yeah, Windows 8 comes along, and their vision was more or less to unify the
Yeah.
tablet and phone and desktop experience. Sounds great in theory. Why have to learn 3 different operating systems? But when it was released, there were so many big changes. There was a lot of negative reaction to it. And I'll just start with sales. Like, it didn't do very well. And if you look at what followed it, Windows 10, which came another 3 years after Windows 8, I guess 8 was so bad they had to skip 9. I can only believe that Microsoft did their research, that Microsoft did their experiments. Microsoft got positive feedback, and they continued on with this operating system. I did a little bit of research before the video, and I couldn't find a ton of Microsoft decided to do this in complete isolation examples. So let's just assume they did their research. But by the time they come out with it and people actually see it, and mom uses it and grandpa uses it, there was wide-scale rejection. Here's my personal experience. I think, oh, great, I got the new operating system came out. I'm usually an early adopter for some of that stuff. So I had an experiment computer set up. I loaded up Windows 8, and playing around, I'm like, oh, wow, this is, a lot of changes, like this whole tile interface. And all right, that's cool. Let's shut it off. I got other things to do. Wait. How do I shut off my computer? And I'm fishing around for this button. I could not find it. I had to Google how to shut off my Windows 8 computer. And at that point, I was like, done. No. Personally, if I could say, Microsoft, here's a magic wand, here's what I would have done. Really smaller changes more frequently. Rather than wait 3 years to dump this new version on us, start changing the start button over time and shifting our behaviors more towards that, learning less of it over time. Like Facebook, they're not going to drop version 25.0 on you, and it's going to be a massive difference from the one you were using a year ago. Like, their changes are subtle, they're incremental. And perhaps if I didn't use Facebook for 5 years, I might be confused as to how the new version works, but there's little versions changing over time.
Well, 2 assumptions down. What about competitive advantage? I'd like to throw that one up there as a slow pitch. How does that one fail? I feel like companies oftentimes think they've got an edge, and they don't. Here's the one I think that is usually the critical component to this. A product already exists, but I can do it better, and I can offer it for a cheaper price. Maybe I can undercut Amazon Cloud, or maybe I can undercut Azure Cloud and come to market with spin my own kind of cloud type of service. Is that is that a valid assumption that that's a competitive advantage? Sometimes we think price is everything, and people don't necessarily bite on the on what do you call it, on the mousetrap?
The better mousetrap.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just coming up with, I love just thinking of this through examples. Amazon had their Fire phone. Do you remember the cell
Yeah, I
phone
remember
that
that.
they produced?
Mhm.
I believe Facebook had one too for a minute. They gave it a shot. They were a giant gorilla with all the money in the world, but yeah, they just didn't quite. They weren't able to leverage that competitive advantage for the phone. I can't fault them for releasing one and trying it out and having the guts to lose some money on it. But I mean, can you think of anything they could have done differently with an Amazon Fire phone?
Well, they could have beat Apple, I suppose, with a phone that actually was I say brilliant, but like so different, so novel, and so interesting to work with. I think everyone else is just playing catch up. I feel like the competitive analysis piece is something that needs to go ongoing, and this is one of those assumptions that I feel like is not just a before you start your product, make sure that you can validate this assumption, then move on. You need to keep validating this assumption. How do you know that you're still competitive? How do you know that and I'll convert this to, how do you know you're still relevant? And we can see too many huge organizations that have failed to adapt when they realize that their competitive edge is no longer like Sears. You can order anything anywhere. We're all over the place. This is, you want anything, imagine it, we have it. Just go to your local Sears and make that happen. Well, people got really happy just surfing from their phone and having stuff show up at their door, and realize that, wow, even stuff that I forgot I ordered shows up. How awesome is that? You couldn't do that at Sears. You couldn't walk by something like, I'd like to have that, and click buy, and then walk and forget and go get a slushie in the mall, and then it shows up at your door later. No, anything they were going to do was catch up. But there's other bigger stores, other bigger chains that have been able to adapt, but they've kind of looked at it from the logistics route. So, I mean, Walmart, whether you like or hate these organizations is kind of really not the point of this video, but they went the logistics route. They said, we need to solve the logistics side of things. And if we can gain a tremendous edge on similar to Amazon, but people know the Walmart brand, you can do this in-store, you could do this online, and it will get to your door just as quick as if it was a Amazon delivery. That was kind of important. Plus, they also have the price advantage. Walmart has always had the price advantage. So they were able to play ball on their price and put a heavy investment into logistics. They've had no choice but to think of how do we network the world of Walmart stores and product to our customers, which are global. So whatever your product is today, cool. What your product is tomorrow, you might be a logistics company tomorrow. If you're doing your competitive analysis. Are you ready to pivot or ready to adjust?